Before we hit record, Jim and I had a deep conversation that shifted the tone of this episode a little bit. Instead of talking about Jim's growing up on the farm, we spent our time discussing leadership, identity, burnout, and the human side of work. Most of that came from me because my experience with leadership shaped where I wanted this episode to go. I've been wrestling with those themes in my writing, and this episode finally gave me a time where we could talk about and name them. And in many ways, this is a great book into the conversation with Mark Voors, where he approached leadership from the ground up, the worker bee's perspective. Jim approaches leadership from the top down, an executive C-suite perspective. Think of this as a two-part and a broader reflection on leadership and personal development. This one has a little different rhythm, a little different flow than my usual ag episodes. It's more reflective, a little more philosophical, but it turned out to be a great conversation between old friends. Welcome to the Patio Pondering Podcast. Today I have Jim Bishop, a native of Warsaw, Leesburg, Indiana. Jim and I were roommates my last year at FarmHouse, and so I've known Jim for approaching over 3 decades. Jim has a really neat life and what he's experienced from growing up on the farm there in Leesburg, a really interesting farm that he grew up on with crop production and seed production, and going to Purdue, getting a master's degree. And the interesting part that I want to get in with talking with Jim is his progression through corporate and how he captured his entrepreneurial spirit after he figured out that corporate wasn't. So welcome, Jim.
Thank you, Jim. It's a good opportunity to be here.
Well, and I kind of already did a quick timeline of your life, but can you kind of just summarize where you've been and how you ended up with conjunction leadership?
Yeah. Well, so background, bachelor's, master's at Purdue, but before that, Kosciuszko County is home. Always probably will be, no matter where I move. Grain and livestock farm primarily growing up. We had feeder pigs when I first started. We had sows when I was a baby. Then as we got older, we moved to feeder pigs and eventually no more pigs and just some feedlot cattle. And then cows and calves as former 4-H projects and kept them around for a little bit. And that was the major extent of our livestock initiatives. But the farm grew and grew and grew between grandpa's retirement and dad's leaving teaching. The farm kept growing to about 5,000 acres. That includes seed production and just regular row crop production today. Went to Purdue, got a bachelor's in animal science, figured I didn't know enough, so I stayed to try and get a master's. Got a master's in physiology and behavior, which at the time seemed like it was just a natural progression and I was never going to use it again. But as life turns out, I use it almost every day today. But in between there, after my master's, I went to work in genetics for a little bit for PIC, set up boar studs and sow farms in the early days of the AI boom and integration. And moving from that into realizing that the science was actually the easy part, but the people became the hard part. As we put more non-ag people on ag operations, a lot of times there came a lot more confusion and chaos, and putting more broken people into a system doesn't make the system any better. So I chose to pivot my career at that point and look more at the human side of agriculture. I went to work at ABG and put together training programs and instructional design for a lot of adult education type of stuff. Some of that was ag basics, some of that was production sciences. But what I learned was a lot of how an adult learns how to put things together that helps them resonate. From there, the office of FFA was setting itself up here in Indianapolis. I came back to the national office and served there for 4 years doing fundraising for the student programs, which seems like a deviation from the career, but really was. I called on the major executives of all the ag companies out there, and I got to have a firsthand case study at what does corporate culture look like. And from there, went to work at Elanco, and that's where I spent the bulk of my career in animal health, always working on the sidelines of the science, but always in the human element of it. So I had the fortunate opportunity to work in leadership development the majority of my career, executive development for a large part of it, and then sales management and sales leadership for a short while in that journey as we were buying companies and merging them together. My job as a sales manager was really to build culture. And then I finished my corporate career working for the parent company of Eli Lilly. Had the very fortunate advantage of working with the CEO and his executive staff as they chartered a new organization. And what you see today with Lily was birthed about 10 years ago when we were working together in the corporate office
Hmm.
there. So that was a lot of fun helping them kind of ideate and think and plan and get through their difficult moments so that they could the innovation boom that most people are seeing today with the company of Lily is now coming to existence. But um, how did conjunction leadership come is a whole different story, but it's all of those things all put together. Um, it's birthed out of a lot of heartache and pain and a lot of soul searching and understanding what made me and who I want to be, and those things collapsing upon one another in the year 2020 when a lot of things were volatile. But in those years was when I decided that I had learned a lot and my time learning about the human system was done. And now what I wanted to do was go help other people find their path in life as well. And I was doing that internally, coaching executive clients inside. But what I realized was the world was much bigger than just Lily, and I wanted to be of service to more people and get back to my roots in agriculture a little bit more. And
Hmm.
so I could start taking clients of any sort from wherever and help them keep their head on straight in the midst of the volatility and uncertainty. Kind of a combination between mental health and physical health and spiritual health, all of those things together, and just make sure that they're leading their companies or their organizations with greater wholeheartedness that creates cultures where people actually thrive and not where they suffocate.
Interesting. So yesterday, or this morning, I dropped the episode with Mark Voors, and he's doing something similar with coaching. But I think what is different between you two, and I'm really interested in exploring it, is Mark has dealt with the bottom side of ag from a sales standpoint, the people, the worker bees that do it. And we talked about in that conversation, how do you approach it from the top down? Well, you've approached it from the top down. So you've been to say you've been to the mountaintop and you've seen how leadership is. What is it about your ag background and growing up on the farm in Leesburg that gave you the skills that you could talk to the C-suite?
Uh, well, it's an interesting question because I don't think that my background necessarily did. I think probably my personality has.
Hmm.
But in agriculture, if there's anything, I mean, we're all normal people, right?
Well, we
Some
hope.
of the wealthy, yeah, the farmer next door always looks like the biggest pauper, but probably has the biggest bank account or has a large bank account, right? But they live a pauper's lifestyle because of their service mentality, and I think that probably is the thing that helped me was just it doesn't matter how big your title is or what office you sit in, you're still a person and you still struggle. The world around you is still volatile and uncertain. There's still some insecurity in your life. And I just see that in other people's lives. It doesn't matter if they happen to be paid 16 times what the average person is paid in the world, or it doesn't matter if they're leading an organization of 5 people or they're leading an organization of 50,000. They're still a human first and foremost before anything. So I suppose that's probably the thing.
Okay. Interesting. Well, as I think back to my career, and I've been a worker bee, um, how how do you work with your clients and maybe how working on the farm and you talked about the mundanity of riding on that 856. Did that help you, or how do you lead leaders and to deal with what the innate resentment between the workers and the leaders?
Hmm. Hmm. Um, yeah. Well, let me maybe describe the progression. Let me take the question in a slightly different way, and then I'll come back
Hmm.
to answering the question. But, in corporate and having a role that was in leadership development or training was a large part of my background. And what would happen is these leaders, well intentioned, would go away on their executive retreats and they would come back with their PowerPoint decks and their 3 bullet points that they wanted the whole organization to know. And they would come back to our leadership team and say, now put this in action and help everyone believe it. And it was top down, but sort of a bottom up approach as well. And it was our job then to create events or experiences that would embed that type of language and or the skill that they needed into the culture. And we took great pride. I took great pride in learning how to create those events and those
Mhm.
experiences. And I would put a tremendous amount of effort and a curation behind how to create the environment where someone would actually absorb and believe and learn on their own so that they could come to a place of understanding of what these three pegs or these three pillars or the cultural imperatives must be for us to succeed. And to some extent, it worked relatively well. But then what would happen is the executives were always about 10 steps ahead of where the average employee was living. And they were going away on their next retreat just at the same point when the employees started to get the very first one. And so they would constantly be reading or changing or adapting the language before true application was happening. Right. And it felt like from the average employee, there was maybe a, whiplash effect going on. Like we were just over here. Now we're over here. Now we're
Yeah.
over here and we're over there. And so I think my bias is that the inherent distrust that happens between the front line and the boardroom is oftentimes just the employee's reticence to be able. They're always ahead. They're always moving. They're always going forward, and they're not yet thinking about change management and how long it takes to move the system behind them. And so, rightly so, a leader is leading. They're moving. They're plowing the ground that's in front of them, but they're not necessarily thinking about how long does the soil need to percolate before the
Mm.
seed actually is harvested, right? And that tension creates the distrust that I think you reference a lot of times. And it's in that distrust or that gap or that vacuum where the relational component between leadership and the front line just doesn't develop. There isn't the there isn't enough time in the day for them to spend enough time with every employee to help them
Hmm.
understand their humanity or their personhood, right? So that then answers maybe helps answer some of the question is I don't believe there's an inherent distrust. I just think there's an inherent disconnect because leaders aren't slowing down long enough to understand what it used to be like to be the front line. They
Mhm.
were there at one point, right? But they're not there today. And oftentimes maybe this is a little, what I do see is this is a little different in agriculture because we never quite lose our roots in agriculture. We still think
Yeah.
we're a farm kid that doesn't have a penny to spare and we have to duct tape
Yeah.
and baler twine it.
Exactly.
So, um, but that's a whole nother cultural challenge. But when you get into like major corporations, they do tend to lose their identity a little bit when they get higher and higher in the food chain because there aren't enough people around them who actually tell them the truth, and there are too many people who defer to their power and want to bow to that power because they're afraid. They're honestly just afraid that I'm going to lose my job, or in the world of upsizing and downsizing and corporate layoffs, no one really wants to open up and tell the boss what's happening because they don't want to be the next one to go. So all that said is the higher they rise in an organization, the less they actually get true authentic feedback. And the less they get true authentic feedback, the easier it is for them to lose their sense of identity as well. So if there's one gift that I give my clients is we just keep them humble. I'm not somebody who's going to let them just start with not getting a third person's perspective, or I'm not going to share with them the difficult experience that I have when I'm interacting with them, because if they're interacting with me that way, they're probably interacting with their employees that way. And they just don't know it because
Mhm.
employees are going to be a lot nicer. um, I'm going to
Yeah.
be more direct. So I don't know if that answers the question, but that's how I kind of approach it is like it's not a bottom up type of thing when you're changing culture. You just can't do it. I did it for many, many years in an organization trying to put these events together. Um, and then the employee would come to the event and they would say, yeah, but have you met my boss? They don't do it this way, or they're not talking about this anymore. They're not even thinking this way. And so that created the disconnect. So when I launched this business, I'm like, I'm no longer going to do it from the bottom up approach. We're not going to go around training all employees on all the language and putting together all these skill building workshops if a leader truly doesn't have their head on straight and they're not getting it because their money is not well spent if they're just training employees but not changing their own attitude.
Well, as you're going through your description, I had one thought that just kept going. I worked for a company based in Des Moines for 3 years, and in those 3 years, there were two different plans for the company. And when the second one came around, the unanimous comment amongst my colleagues was, "Oh, the leader read another book on an airplane and we're changing what we're doing now." And we
Yep.
just a year and a half, 2 years past the other one, and we're just figuring out how we're going to follow this path, and now we're going down this path. So that's a perfect illustration of the disconnect. I mean, it was a great idea. We're going to talk about this. It's great, and our customers will like it. But geez, we're just trying to do our job.
Yep. Yep. And when the external world is changing so quickly, right? The internal world has to change even quicker to keep up.
Mm-hmm.
So externally, customers change, the environment is changing, the tariff situation is changing, all of these things. So when that external swirl happens, the internal, meaning the organizational self, has to keep up. And it has to change even faster. But the problem in modern workplace cultures is we're not designed for nimble and agile changes. Our hierarchies have been put in place to create stability. And that stability, that chain of command, if you will, did create the control that we needed in the time that it was desired. But in today's world, that same sense of control is what's strangling most of our organizations. The, the leadership approaches that we use today, the command and control, the employee boss relationship, the psychological uncertainty that occurs because we have all of these centralized power structures, right? All of that kind of stuff is what's strangling organizations today because the internal cannot keep up with the external pace of change. And I'm guaranteed to have a job because there aren't enough leaders who know how to adapt. They're still using outdated leadership mindsets to try to command and control and put their arms around and optimize and plan for success. And they can't possibly do that. And it's burning them out left and right.
Well, let's think back to your ag roots in a farm.
Sure.
Um, there's we have cycles and we do things. Okay, your example of AI. So listeners, when Mark or Jim and I are talking about AI, it's artificial insemination, not ChatGPT or Claude or Gronk. Okay,
Yeah. The original AI.
the original AI on a pig farm. You breed a sow, you preg check her at 35, 42 days, and you put her in a farrowing crate at 112 days, 114, 16 days. They got babies. You wean them at 21 days. 145 days later, they're turned into a consumable product. So we got that cycle. And then on a crop farm that you grew up on, we hit April, we plant, we fertilize, we cultivate, we harvest. And we've got these things that we know happen. But I think what we get exposed to on the farm is, oh crap, it rained all of April. We still got to plant, but what are we going to do? So you have to shift. Are those lessons that you got on the farm of whether it's a sick pig or a sick calf or a calf that went halter break the way you want, help teach these leaders that we have a plan, but we need to be adaptable in this plan?
Oh yeah. That's a good linkage between those things. Um, so I'll say yes, the lessons that I learned in the way that you live an agrarian lifestyle is you wake up and you generally look outside and say, what's the weather today and how can we make our plan still happen? Right.
Yeah.
So it's I still, my dad is almost 80 and at least twice a month or twice a week, probably I get a text message from him about what the weather is like and asking me what the weather is like where I'm at. Right. Why? Because that's what sets your schedule.
Oh
But
yeah.
it's anchoring yourself to kind of what is the North Star. Like generally the crops need to be in the field between April and May 15th, right? So
Mm-hmm.
we're going to make hay when the sun shines, or we're going to run the planter as long as we can, right? At night until we can't run it anymore. Um, but then there's a season for rejuvenation, right? When
Mm-hmm.
do we need to take a break or when do we need to rest? Um, but I think that's the piece that probably has gotten lost in the equation is we've been overly addicted to what does productivity look like. So we always make hay. It doesn't matter if we just make hay when the sun shines, right? Because the sun may not be shining long enough ever again. So we just keep making hay. And I think that's probably even in our agricultural world, the piece that I get most disturbed by is we were the originators of the definition of productivity, right? Like agriculture is the original industry. People grew their food long before, and they learned if they put a seed in the ground, like maybe two seeds came back. And then if they put those two seeds in the ground, maybe six seeds came back. And then we hybridized things, and then we got faster, and then we mechanized things, and it gets faster and faster. But the definition of productivity is still there, the units in versus units out. And we've become overly addicted to that definition as our definition of success, not just in agriculture, but in westernized society in general. How many units in am I putting in, and how many units out am I extracting? And if I don't extract more than I put in, I am not valuable as a human and as a business. And I have a personal wrestling with that. Like that lesson I learned in agriculture long ago still resonates pretty deep within my DNA. It's still there. It's still in my reactive pattern of behavior. But I personally can no longer measure my value as a human based upon how many units I put in and how many units I extract back, because that doesn't allow for the season of renewal that's needed at different points in the journey. Um, you know, biblically, there was a reason why we had the year of Jubilee and fields lay fallow. It was to help them rejuvenate, to help the soil regrow. The soil was a living element. It needed that period of time. Today, we're doing that synthetically. We're putting synthetic fertilizers on things, and we're helping keep the soil always moving, always growing, but never having a period of renewal. But that breeds over into our own life. I don't see enough leaders taking a period of renewal for themselves or creating white space in their calendar with the purposeful intention of renewing themselves. It's meeting after meeting, business decision after business decision, from sun up to sundown, and then even some weekends, evenings, always on. And I think it's even worse in our agricultural companies. I mean, candidly, when I work with those clients, um, it's just inherent, generation after generation, DNA passed on to DNA. You could call it inherited trauma, if you will, but I just don't think that there are enough people who understand that they are not a human doing, and it's becoming even worse as of late because the economy and everything else that's around it isn't supporting it as well. But the human doing element is burning them out because they're a human being first. They don't know how to be anymore. They just know how to do. And my heart breaks for those types of leaders because they're creating cultures where people are just burning out left and right.
And fearful.
Yeah. Yeah. Lots of fear.
Well, as you were talking about that, I wrote down, why are we in ag always busy? And we're always busy. I mean,
Yeah.
we're always doing something, and sometimes we're just doing something to do something, right?
Yeah. 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 Is that a rhetorical question that you want to riff on, or is that just a postulated question that's hanging in
That's
the air? Like
rhetorical. It's we don't need to riff
okay.
on it, but I think there's another thing in ag that we've talked about mental health in ag the last 5 years, and we've been serious about it. But the worker bees, my neighbors, we're a bunch of judgmental motherfuckers, to be blunt. And here's a perfect illustration of it. I have corn to harvest. Okay, everybody around me is done. Well, except for one or two people. Okay? Everybody's done. We had a great fall, and I've been chastised. Why aren't you done? Why aren't you done? Why aren't you done? Well, I took this Saturday off to go watch my son marching band. I took the next Saturday off to watch my son in his marching band. I made sure he went to his Boy Scout meeting. My wife worked, so I had to do daddy stuff. Oh, and by the way, I took a business trip to China. But the response, instead of saying, "Hey, that was great, you took care of it," it's like, "Well, you should have been harvesting corn." And I'm like, "Nah, I got to watch my son in the Hoosier Dome. That's a better time than running the cleaner." So how do we overcome that in leadership, and from a top-down standpoint of saying it's okay to take PTO, it's okay to rejuvenate? Well, how do you teach the C-suite that's okay?
Yeah. We don't change a culture by changing all the people. We change a culture by changing ourselves. Right? Means period. So Um, as an employee, and I full recognize, when I was in a large organization myself, there's an opportunity to look at the culture around you as if it is an animate object, as if it is a person almost. And we
Hmm.
need to change that culture is the predominant feeling. We want to, but what it tells us, what the culture is telling us is something that I'm not comfortable with in myself. Right? So as an example, if the organization around you is always on, always working, if there are people that are always sending messages, or in your case, if the farmers around you are all done harvesting by October 15th, right? This is what the culture around you is telling you. And I'm only good enough if I'm part of that culture, period. Then what I want to do is change the culture because I'm not comfortable missing my son's basketball game and I'm not
Hmm.
comfortable not going to my church events, right? So I want the culture to change so that I don't have to, right? That's an externalization of it. But
Hmm.
you're not likely to change culture. You're very unlikely to. Like no employee has the power to change their culture, but they do have the power to change them. Right? What I mean in this case is it sounds like Jim changed himself. Jim is
Hmm.
standing up against the prevailing theme of, or the prevailing feeling that everybody needs, a successful farmer is done by October 15th. Jim has said, well, I'm successful because I have space in my calendar to go to China. I'm successful because I have space in my calendar to watch my son march in band. I'm successful because, and you've readjusted your definition of what success is so that you feel more grounded at standing in the middle of culture that isn't supporting what you normally would do.
Hmm.
Right? But you've changed yourself. And now when you change yourself, it doesn't really matter or what's happening around you because you can say, I'm successful if, not
Hmm.
I'm successful when. Right? I'm
Hmm.
successful when my corn is harvested by April 15th or by October 15th. That's a win. But I'm successful if I'm able to go watch my son march in a marching band is a whole different mindset. So that's my message always to the leaders. People that sit at the top of the pyramid, they often don't see that. They often don't even know that they're responsible for creating culture. They just think it's something that happened. But they over time, they've kind of lost that part of their ego that says, people are going to follow what I do much more than what I say, right? And if I'm sending emails at midnight, they're going to believe they need to respond to them at midnight. Um, if I'm traveling on weekends and evenings, they're going to travel on weekends and evenings because, in general, we look up to our elders. We look up to the
Hmm.
people who are in higher positions of authority or responsibility. And that means we tend to want to be like them or have what they have, sometimes to a fault, right? But if we're looking up to the people who do that and that's what they do, then culture is people like us doing things like this. And they're the ones that kind of set the tone, right? They don't know that they need to change themselves if they're going to change culture. They just think that's an employee or like an HR issue. So that's why the leaders would come to us and go, put these programs in place. HR, make this happen. HR, put this into
Yeah.
our people and culture. Um, and in reality is it's my job now in my role to hold those leaders accountable because if they don't change themselves, their culture will never change. Now, does that mean they don't send emails at midnight anymore? No, but we can teach them how to schedule their emails so they all go out at 8 o'clock in the morning
Oh
instead
yeah.
of hitting
Okay.
everyone's inboxes at midnight. I'm not telling them when they have to work. I'm not telling them when they need to be on. I'm just telling them that everybody is watching all the time.
What is the change when you're working with a leader? And I'm thinking I'm using leader in a holistic sense, not just
Sure.
somebody in a C-suite.
Yeah.
What's
Yep.
that aha moment when they go, "Oh, Jim, you're right."
Yeah. Well, very few people call me because they see the opportunity, right?
Yeah.
Um, Unfortunately, we are a culture and a people that doesn't like to change until we have pain.
Hmm.
So a lot of people call me when they have pain, but the presenting pain that they're seeing generally is our 5 year strategy has now become 10 years and we're still no closer. Um, or the pain that they're experiencing is I've got not head employees and they're not doing what I want them to be doing. Or they might say, even more succinctly or more definitely, like, I can't keep this pace of change up anymore. I'm wondering. Um, Probably if they're a more intuitive leader, they might be even asking some of the questions like, hmm, I've climbed this ladder. Now I'm wondering if this is the right wall, if this is the right vistage point that I want to be looking out over, right? Am I in the right spot? But all of those are the symptoms. Those are not actually the problem.
Mm-hmm.
If
Oh
your
yeah.
5 year plan has become your 10-year plan now, then why is that? It's probably because you're not the type of leader who are helping people understand where to go and how to help them get there faster. But the problem isn't your people or your not head employees. The problem is you. If you're climbed the ladder and you're not sure this is where you want, but now you're here and you can't say you don't want it because you would feel ungrateful for it. The problem isn't that you climbed the ladder. You had a lot of success. You got great skills and talents. They got you there. The problem is your willingness to say, what do I really want in life? And am I living it according to my own definitions of success? Or did I just do these things because the people around me told me this is what I should be doing? So all of that said and done, the root of most of the work that I do is around the core identity of a leader. It doesn't matter if they're sitting at the top of their pyramid, in the middle of the pyramid, or if they're all the way at the bottom of the pyramid. A leader being that type of person who is taking responsibility for leading themselves first before they
Mm-hmm.
even try to look at leading other people. And so, um, you know, earlier this year, I released my book. The title of it is The Adventure Within, because before I mean, the leaders will come to me because they want the external world to change, yes, but before we even attempt to work on changing the external world, I'm always the heart of a leader and working on the internal first. So that's how I get them to change. Their moment of truth comes when they're able to finally articulate the way that things are working is not how it's not working for me anymore, right?
Mm-hmm.
The way that I've been working is no longer working for me. When they're able to articulate that, and they'll use their own words, but that is the moment then they're willing to go further into the adventure within. If they're not there yet, then they're probably not going to be a client of mine. Or at least
Okay.
if they're not getting closer to that. If they're just still wanting this employee to change, or they need to go in and fire half of their population, or they're worried about the next downsizing that they've got to manage. I mean, those are great external challenges and all leaders are going to have to face them. But once they get to that point and go, I'm tired of having another layoff. I'm tired of scaling this organization up only to peel it back to its bare minimum. Like, what is wrong? And if they get to that point, now we can start talking about maybe it's your adaptive leadership style that's not in existence anymore. Maybe you only know how to scale through command and control measures by adding more people to a broken system.
Mm-hmm.
Like, oh, and then they're like, how do we do that? Like, you don't do it by changing the world. You do it by changing yourself.
Wow. As you talk about leadership, you working with leaders, I think about my last position, and that CEO needed you because, well, he did failed, and I'm a product
Yeah.
of that failure.
Yeah, yeah. And that's what breaks my heart, Jim. I people jokingly ask, why did you start your business? And I'm like, because work sucked for way too long. Work
Yeah.
sucks and when it sucks for way too long, it sucks the life out of people. And when it sucks the life out of people, then our communities go without leadership, our families go without leadership, and people sit on their couches at the end of the day and just scroll Instagram, hoping to feel better and do it all over the next day. But why does work suck? Well, work sucks because we have leaders who they don't know another way. They're just stuck in a reactive pattern that says, this is how I was taught to lead, or this is how I've been brainwashed that business has to run. And they're not yet willing to kind of look above the clouds and go, there has to be another way. There has to be a better way. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and, this constant upsizing and downsizing and downscaling and bowing to shareholders' whims. Um, that to me is the vein of cultural problems in our organization. I just put a paper together for another client, but there is a theory. There's in workplace theory. It's called Theory X and Theory Y. There are Theory X leaders and there are Theory Y leaders. Theory X leaders are leaders who look at people and say they're inherently not able to make the best decisions for their life. They're not able to be trusted, right? Um, or people are naturally lazy. Those are all things that Theory X leaders have a belief system about. Theory Y leaders have a belief system that say people are actually trustworthy and they're very inherently motivated to do their best work. So it really starts with, how did someone's neural wiring come to be either Theory X or Theory Y? How did I learn that people were naturally not able to be trustworthy? Or how did I just naturally learn that people are inherently um, motivated to do their best work? Well, you don't just birth that way, right? You were birthed as a neutral baby, and somewhere along the way, your neural conditioning helped you get to a place of distrust or a greater openness. But if you are a Theory X, you create cultures with strong structure, lots of command and control, lots of process and procedures, and it inherently breeds out all the things that a human needs to thrive. If you're Theory Y, you naturally build cultures that are freeing and liberating and expansive and allow individuals to thrive in an environment like that. But not enough leaders even know that. They don't even
Hmm.
know their own neural wiring. They've never taken an understanding of, I mean, am I Theory X? Am I Theory Y? They don't know the language. I don't expect them to. But how did you get to the point where you're at, where you're so distrusting of other people? And unfortunately, the world is a pretty unsafe place. It exploits your vulnerability pretty early on if you let it. And if you don't know it, then what you do is you grow up in an environment that says never let them see you sweat. Don't let people take advantage of you. And the world is kind of set up to push people into Theory X mindsets. And when people live in fear, they're going to create cultures that try to minimize all the disruptions that create fear. Okay? That's Theory X cultures. But there is another theory out there called the self-determination theory. Edward Deci wrote the self-determination theory, and it really just describes three things that people need to thrive: autonomy, mastery, and connection. And what that means is, I, as an individual, want to know that I'm constantly getting better at something. That's mastery, right? And maybe many somethings. I want to be the best at something. I want to be better at my craft. I mean, as a child, I want to learn to ride a bike, and then I want to learn to ride a two-wheeler, and then I want to learn to ride without training wheels, right? You always wanted to get better. It's kind of birthed into us. The sense of autonomy is, I want to know that I'm in charge of making the majority of decisions for the quality of my life, right?
Hmm.
And the sense of connection is not just, I want to be connected to other people, but I want to be connected to a purpose that's bigger than myself and serve humanity to some extent, right? If we have those three ingredients in your culture or in your life, then you're set up for human thriving, right? Those three things are what Theory Y leaders put in place, and they protect it and defend it religiously in their organizations. And they fight against the tyranny of trying to put structures in place that would minimize autonomy, mastery, or connection. But Theory X leaders don't even know. And they're doing everything they can to breed that out of the culture, which is why work sucks for so long for so many people, including yourself. And why then there
Hmm.
are people who are victims of Theory X leaders creating cultures that breed all of those things out of their employees. And then we have bitterness and resentment and hate out there instead of passion and empathy and growth. Um, and I fight religiously to make sure that we move. If I start working with a Theory X leader, that's great. I mean, I have no. My belief system is that people are inherently able to change. I don't believe that we're fixed into anything. So if someone comes to me and they have a Theory X mindset, it just means we have a lot more disruption to start doing, because somewhere along the way, their nervous system was conditioned to believe that I can't trust anyone else. And if that's the case, they create downstream chaos for all the people they lead. But they can also, if they, in certain environments, that strong sense of structure,
Hmm.
optimizing, planning, controlling, they've learned to manage a balance sheet and an income statement better than anyone else. And what happens is they get results. But there's a lot of travesty downstream from it, right? Theory Y leaders still get results, but they're going to do it in a way that creates more freedom and connection and autonomy amongst their employees, and people are going to thrive and they're going to walk through walls of fire for leaders like that.
And if you really want to screw up a system, you change from a theory Y to a theory X overnight.
Absolutely.
I live that.
That's
And
the
as you're describing those two, I'm living 2019 all over again.
yeah. I have the same reflections even in my corporate career, Jim. Like, um, and it's honestly today why I enjoy working with the smaller organizations better than the
Mm-hmm.
large corporates anyway. But it used to be, particularly in agricultural companies, when we were small, before consolidation occurred and before we started putting seed and chemicals all together in the same company, which ironically today is starting to break apart again, right? So
Yeah.
um, it's fun and kind of weird to also watch that happen. But when you started putting all these conglomerates together, what got bred out of it was, I mean, we were doing, why did that happen in the first place? Let's ask that question. It happened because the almighty income statement and the shareholder demanded return on investment, period. Right. Um, because in agriculture, we manage with really thin margins and and we have an unpredictable profitability
Mm-hmm.
equation. So the way that you control that is you consolidate. So we kept consolidating and consolidating and consolidating. Farmers got bigger. Um, we consolidated in the production front. We consolidated in the agronomy front. We consolidated in the equipment front. We everywhere, right? So everything got bigger. But if we were to go back to the beginning of when we started our career and we still had a lot of these smaller organizations of 300 people that did really good, meaningful work, it was easier for people to feel autonomy, mastery, and connection because we didn't have all those structures around it. And we weren't driving towards the income statement. What we were driving towards was farmer equity. We were driving towards helping producers stay profitable. Somewhere along the way, I think our agricultural systems have lost that mindset. Um, which we could blame the publicly traded organizations as shareholder problems. We have a lot more shareholders who don't understand our industry and we can't push it back against our boards. So we're constantly trying to drive towards that number. Um, we can we can also say consolidation and the size, the sheer size of these organizations are hard to manage today. And so when you don't know, you put a lot of structure in place to manage large organizations. But I think in general, it's just the reticence for leaders to step into a place and go, okay, what's it going to be to bring this back to some sense of humanity? And we've lost our way to some extent because we don't have enough leaders, in my estimation, taking that amount of reflection or white space and saying, I can push back against culture. Like, it's just the way it is. We just work harder. We're just busy all the time. We just keep working and working and working and consolidating and managing all the problems that come. But no one is stepping above the clouds and going, wait, there has to be a better way. There are a few leaders. I mean, I'm
Yeah.
privileged to journey with them. They find me and I love it. It is the joy of my life to watch them push back and say, our business can do it a different way. We can do it different. And when they do and they get their employees behind it, there is nothing that's going to stop them. But unfortunately, we have a lot of really talented executives who have really poorly informed boards, and their boards don't know organizational culture. And what's going to happen is these boards are going to push back against these executives and drive them out if we're not careful. And so now I'm starting to get much more passionate about helping with the board level conversations, not just the executive level conversations. So I'll give you an example. I was working with a guy, an executive, really successful. Like, if you just measured success in terms of dollars and revenue, this guy is off the charts. He had a brilliant idea, started a great company. It scaled and grew really quickly. And then private equity got involved and they wanted to get in on this journey. And he accepted their offer. Um, and over time, private equity has built a really organized business and retained him as their chief executive officer in the middle of all of this. And he's scratching his head going, why isn't it fun anymore? Why isn't it fun? And he kept asking me that. I don't know why it's not fun. And I asked him the question. And I said, well, when was it fun? He's like, it was fun when we were all crazy. Like he said, I have these two types of people in my business. I have the crazy people and I have the normal people. And it was fun when we were all just crazy. And I'm like, tell me more about what crazy was. And he's like, we got up in
Yeah.
the morning and we thought about Farmer X down the street because he was our neighbor. And we thought, how can we save Farmer X a little bit more money today? How can we put more equity in his pocket today? And We were just crazy. We didn't know we had jobs. We didn't know we had titles. We were just working for Farmer X. And he said, now over time, what we have is all these normal people. They have the big titles and they have the big business degrees behind them. And this company has brought in all the executives to make it look like we have a legitimate business on paper. And we do. It's going really well, but it's not fun anymore. And I'm like, well, what will it take for you to go back to being chief crazy officer, not just chief executive officer? And I tell you what, Jim, when he got that in his mind, the next day he went back and he started reorganizing people's roles and titles. He started describing to them the story of what it meant to be crazy. He started talking about the real experiences with real farmers who were really struggling in this economy and how could we even just save them a dollar. And if we started saving a dollar, then this was going to be $2 and this was going to be better local communities. Local communities are going to help people thrive. He built the whole story out. The company literally changed because he became chief crazy officer, right? Not because he got rid of his private equity board, not because the board had any different mindset, but because one person decided I don't have to be CEO like they want me to be. I get to be chief crazy officer again, like when I started this business. It started with the mind of a leader. It didn't start with any organizational structure.
Is that because the illustration you have can be replicated many times with not fun? Is that because we rely on training, sales programs, and other things that are not designed for ag? And I think back to the sales, we're selling widgets. Well, we're not selling widgets. We're selling to Farmer John.
Yeah. I don't know. I'm going to refrain. I have a lot of friends in the training industry, so I'm going to refrain from saying it's because of the training we use.
Okay, I got you. Yeah.
But why do we use some of those programs or why do we use some of those things is because there's probably somebody behind it that said this was a good idea, right? Obviously. But the people that thought it was a good idea may have lost their way as well, right? Like, I'll just use my own career example, right? When in animal health, when I started, we were all a bunch of farm kids. We all came from very similar backgrounds. Our ag degrees were similar. Our upbringings were similar. We had an understanding of in our heart, like what we were waking up to do and our parents and how they struggled. That is really hard to replicate as an organization scales and grows. I mean, I'll take it back to the original artificial insemination industry, right? When we started scaling that and we brought people in that didn't understand that, I mean, they could put a rod in and they could squeeze something through it. And in 3 weeks, they would hope that they would get a positive test back. But they didn't know what was happening inside of a sow, or they didn't know where that pig was going to end up long term, or they didn't know how the food system operated. They just didn't grow up with it. Today, our agricultural systems aren't doing a very good job of describing that. I mean, you were raised in it, I was raised in it, and you know the mindset that you had is unless there's more units in and or less units in and more units out, you're not productive. Sometimes that means we don't take time to help people understand the why, or we don't help take time to help build a relationship with someone. We hire them, we give them a formal training program, we throw them into a job, and we say, you're supposed to have passion about this. We love passion. We love that word. But what we're not doing is instilling it in any way because our leaders are anything but passionate. Our leaders are very dispassionate and decentralized or centralized and organized and controlled people. I don't see chief crazy officer very often. And when I do see him, he needs to be chief crazy officer. He doesn't need to be normal CEO because I need to know that the guy that's leading this organization or the gal that's leading this organization actually believes in where we're going. And so much of my time, especially with the C-suite people, is to get them into their story, like back to the why, and just never stop talking about that because that's what the organization needs to hear more than they need to hear where we're at in the black or the red on the income statement. I don't know if that helps, but that's my rationalization
that's
for
great.
how we've started to lose our way. I see a lot of the CEOs like one of the challenges that they keep giving me is like the boardroom is really difficult these days. Really difficult. The board just doesn't understand. The board is pushing back on this. well, what's the board's metric? It's shareholder investment often. I mean, even if it's a privately held company, but shareholder return. And so, yes, but your job as CEO is to help the board know who is our shareholder more, or who are our stakeholders more than our shareholders sometimes, right? And I have to help these people realize it's their job to also be chief crazy officer with their boards. Like they're
Mm,
just as you have some sort of deference to hierarchy when you're working with your boss, so does a CEO have deference to their board, right? Because the board can hire and fire them. They're also
yeah.
fearful. And in today's world, especially after COVID and especially after the Me Too movement and especially after a lot of the cancel culture, that CEO can be replaced overnight for making one misaligned statement or putting a period at the end of the wrong sentence. And so they are also walking on eggshells with their board. And I'm like, if you don't feel safe, you're not going to go in there and be chief crazy officer, right? So how do we help you get back to a place of feeling safe with your board so you can even push backwards, upwards?
I really like your description of the chief crazy officer because uh, you and I don't fit the mold. And you were talking about it before. You hated the mundanity of chopping stalks. I kind of like raking hay because I can get inside my brain and it's quiet.
Yeah.
Um, I'm a swine nutritionist, but I don't thrive on swine nutrition. So we don't fit a mold. How do you help your CEOs embrace chief crazy officer and help them
Mm,
lead their team so that they can have people that don't fit inside a silo jump a silo?
yeah. It's a long process, Jim. I mean, I would love to say that it's, 30 days and out, or I've got
Yeah.
an online program that you can sign up for, or a cohort that you could be a part of. And yeah, I mean, those things are all helpful. But by the time someone gets to that level of leadership, right? They've usually got at least 20 to 25 years of experience behind them in the public, in their corporate life or in their leadership life, let alone the 20 years that went before that in their educational and childhood life, right? And in reality is our first 20 years really influence our last 60 more than we know, right? Um, a lot of who you are as a person got wired long before you even knew you had a consciousness that was being wired. And so when a leader is in that space and they're really wanting to do something different and they want to break the archetype of the silo that they're in or the box that they've learned to know, that's the ego structure around them. When they're feeling like that ego structure is no longer serving them and it's a little bit too tight, then we often have to step backwards to understand how to step forwards. Like, where did it come from? Who told you it was so? Who told you that you had to put more hierarchy in place to make this business grow? Where was it spoken that all CEOs never tell a story, right? Or never let them see a sweat? I mean, when they start recognizing that there are a lot of these false beliefs that they put around them to keep them safe, what happens is they can start poking their hole. And the good thing is, coming from science, working with a lot of scientists, I just ask them to form an experiment, form a hypothesis. What happens if? And then they'll go try it and just test it. And they'll do a lot of hypothetical or
Hmm.
hypothesis type of work, testing theories and like, oh, well, you're not supposed to say that in the boardroom. Well, who said so? Go do it. See what happens. And so they'll do it one time and they're like, nobody got angry. I'm like, okay, go do it again. Go do it again. And then pretty soon what happens is that sense of ego or that sense of self starts deconstructing and they're like, oh, people like me can do things like this. And that's when they're starting to say, I don't have to harvest all my corn by October 15th. I can
Yeah.
do it my way. I can be a CEO
Hmm.
in my way, not in the way that Harvard told me it should be, or the leadership executive forum that I went to for a weekend course told me this is what all CEOs do to behave. Um, so I think it's coming out of self and coming into authenticity is how I would put that.
So the follow up to that, how do we make getting to yourself
Mm.
acceptable in ag?
Yeah. Oh my gosh, Jim, if I could answer that question, we'd all be millionaires. It's why we have the mental health. conversations going on in agricultural today is because we're only working at the problem level of mental health right now. We're not working at the symptom or the diagnostic level of what caused it. Like, I mean, we have mental health problems because farmers are killing themselves, right? That's why people are in the conversation today is because neighbors and loved ones are taking their own lives. And we're not okay with that. But we're also not okay stepping back into what's causing this problem to occur in the first place. And we don't have a very strong understanding of what it means to not be okay, like in agriculture, period. We're only okay if all things are going right. We're only okay if the balance sheet looks like it's up and to the right. And if we're not okay telling our neighbors we're not okay, we are not okay, right? We're only letting them know what's going right in our life, not what's not going right in our life, which brings us back to previous conversations that we've had, right? Like there's a really strong reticence,
Mm-hmm.
particularly rooted in agriculture, that we're fiercely independent and autonomous. And I don't need anyone else. But in reality is we can't live that way. That's not the way the humans thrive. So my bias is that it goes back to a much, much earlier problem of, you know, we're falsely connected in our communities. We're maybe overly invested into the dirt and the dirtiness of people's lives, but we don't really want to know it and we don't talk about it. And we don't really have community in our agricultural communities. We just have false relationships that know one another pretty well. And I'm like, our farmers, our neighbors, our friends need to know that their life, in order for someone to love you, they need to know both parts of you. They need to know what's going well and what's not going well. And if you don't know how to talk about that, like, that's the challenge. But we all have bad days. We all have bad moments. But bad days and bad moments don't make a bad life. And there's certainly not a reason to take your life.
Well, there's a toxic positivity when we talk about ag. We never have a
Yes.
bad day when we're talking about it. You look at you grab a farm Facebook page and they're talking about, hey, it was great we did hay, and hey, this is great, and we have the license to say, man, I had a shitty ass day. I broke this, I broke this, I broke this, because the feedback from that is, well, you got a lot of problems in your farm or in your business. So we keep that positivity so we don't have to deal with, man, you got problems. Well, yeah, I do. You did too. You just didn't share them.
Yeah, I totally agree. That
Yeah.
it's just I don't know, fierce independence, rugged autonomy, um, stoic,
Mm-hmm.
um, stoic backgrounds. You could point to a lot of them, but I just try to look at the opportunity, right? And if it doesn't matter if it's a CEO, it doesn't matter if it's a leader, it doesn't matter if it's my neighbor. I mean, to me, the bigger opportunity is for people to understand their own emotional health, their own emotional system. And if I'm addicted to positivity or toxic positivity, it means I want to live in the strong positive emotion space most of my time. I can't live there unless I also live in the strong negative emotion, because there's a duality. But if I come back and I numb the feeling or the opportunity to live in the strong negative, meaning I pull myself more back to center, that means I also pull myself more back to center in the strong positive emotion. And I can't feel joy or love. I can't feel elatedness. I can only feel
Mm-hmm.
happy. I can only feel fine. Right. So when people ask, how are you? They answer, I'm busy, because they don't want to really talk about how they are. They don't want to live in the duality of being both very grateful for something that's in your life and very sorrowful for something that isn't the way that you wanted it to be. Like when we learn to talk in
Mm-hmm.
duality, what that means is we really have a fully functioning nervous emotional system. Like I can feel all things all the time. It doesn't mean that I've selectively numbed and I'm just fine or busy.
I think that experiencing the highs and experiencing lows makes you experience both of them better, right?
Yes. If you're allowing yourself to
Wow.
feel all ranges of emotion, then you're able to actually experience life and enjoy the journey. That's my belief.
Enjoy the journey. Well, I think that is a great place for us to end this discussion of enjoy the journey. Well, Jim, this went a completely different direction than I thought it would. As we talked beforehand, the script that I have, I don't think we covered half of it,
Let's tear it up.
which is good.
You're not the first person. You're
Tear
not
it
the
up.
first
So
person that told me I've ever busted their script, Jim. So
cool. Well, Jim, I appreciate your time today. I appreciate more than 30 years of friendship, and I appreciate your cheerleader on my sidelines. And I've enjoyed our conversation today.
awesome. Me too. Thanks for having me.
Here's just another example of how a person's ag roots can take them places that they didn't expect and we didn't expect. We're going to continue this discussion and learn how ag roots form people and how agriculture has affected us and our lives and taken us places we didn't expect. Thanks for all the shares, the likes, and the follows.